Hey everyone, welcome to Base 10 Montessori. My name is Teresa, and today we're going to go over Chapter 11 of The Absorbent Mind by Maria Montessori. And Chapter 11 is titled, How Language Calls to the Child. Now, we've been doing a lot of language videos lately, so I hope you're not tired of it, but I think this chapter is going to be a really great chapter because she goes over a lot of development. Now, I'm not going to put everything from this chapter into this video, so if you like what's going on here, pick up the book and read chapter 11, and it's going to give you a lot more details. But for today, we're going to go over what I feel is the most important parts of the chapter. So in chapter 11, she starts talking about brain development, and she says areas of nerve cells or centers in the brain cortex were shown to be connected with language. Two of these are primarily involved, one being concerned with the hearing of speech, an auditory receptive center, and the other with the production of speech, of the movements required for vocalizing words. One of these is therefore a sensorial center, the other a motor center. The organic center of the ear receives sounds of speech, and that of the mouth, throat, nose, etc. produces them. These two centers develop separately, both on the physiological and the psychological side. What happens in studying nature is that the facts first of all come to our notice, and then when we have understood them, we say how logical they are. And this leads to the thought there must be some intelligent force directing these events. And she says, as for the motor side, its activities can be inferred from the astonishing complexity and precision of the movements needed to produce spoken words. And right here she asks why. And she says it can only be because the sounds heard by the child provoke the delicate movements necessary to reproduce them. The child must naturally hear the sounds in use among his own people before he can repeat them. Hence, the movements for reproducing words must be based on a substratum of sounds registered in the mind, because the movements he will make depend on the sounds he has heard and which the mind has retained. It becomes apparent that, as well as these two nerve centers, there must exist a special sensitiveness and a readiness to act, which are centralized too. The child's activity, therefore, follows his sensations of hearing. So what she's saying right here is that the child doesn't develop that physical portion for speech until that auditory portion has taken in the sounds of speech from around the child. So we have this ability when the child is very, very young, right after birth, to be able to hear specifically the sounds that a human makes. And then our speech organs, that physical part of their body, develops in tandem with the sounds being heard. But it's only related to the sounds in that child's environment. If they're in a different environment, the physical speech organs would develop differently according to the language being heard in that environment. And so it's really interesting how our speech organs are very much connected to what they hear. She says the instrument of the ear is made in the wondrous prenatal life. If a child is born at the 7th month, the ear is already complete and is ready to begin its work. Psychologists who have made special studies of the newborn say that the slowest sense to develop is hearing. To my mind, I have no reason to suspect insensitiveness, but rather a deep gathering in of the sound, a concentration of sensitiveness in the centers for language, especially in that which accumulates words. I reason that the centers are specially designed for the capture of language, of words. So it may be that this powerful hearing mechanism only responds and acts in relation to sounds of a particular kind, those of speech. And she goes on to say, if there were no special isolation of the sensitivity which directs this, the child would start making the most astonishing noises. He would imitate all those peculiar to the place where he happened to be, including non-human ones. So what she is saying here is the child has to have this special sensitiveness to human speech. And if the child just reacted to any noise when they were born, then all noises would be equally important, but to the infant, they're not. There are certain sounds that are more important that the child is sensitized to when they are born, and that is human speech. And she argues here that if the child didn't have this sensitiveness, then they would start reproducing all the sounds in the environment. They would start meowing like a cat, barking like a dog, and making the noise of a vacuum cleaner. But the child doesn't do that. The child is specifically sensitized to human speech. And those are the sounds that the child listens to. That's what is very attractive to the child, and that is what's going into the mind. That's the sound that's being collected for language, and that is going to affect how the child's speech organs develop. And then she talks about some interesting observations made from children who were discovered to be feral. She says there have been wolf children abandoned in the forest, from which later they have made miraculous escapes. And these children, although they have lived amid the cries of animals and birds, the murmuring of water and the rustling of leaves, they emit no sound of any kind, since they have never heard the human tongue, which alone has the power to activate the machinery of speech. And if you are unaware of the story of Victor of Aveyron, that is one story that became very popular, the wild child of Aveyron, Victor. He was a feral child left and abandoned in a forest, left to die there, but he survived. And when he was rescued, the Itard took him in to prove that this child could learn. And he did prove that. He did prove that the child could learn. But at the same time, his ability to pick up on speech and to understand human communication was very limited. And that is one of the stories that she is referring to right here. And she says, we cannot see what goes on within the living being, but the external happenings offer us a guide. First to become fixed in the little one's unconscious are the single sounds of language, and this is the basic part of the mother tongue. We might call it the alphabet. Syllables follow and then words, but these are used without understanding. But how wisely is all this work conducted? She says within the child is a tiny teacher who works like one of those old-fashioned teachers who used to make the children first of all recite the alphabet, then pronounce syllables, and then words. Except that she did it at the wrong time, when the child had already done it for himself and was in full possession of his language. We see how nature's teaching illuminates our own thought. She is the teacher, and at her behest the child learns what to us seem the dullest parts of language, yet the child shows the keenest interest. And this lasts well into the next period of his development, from 3 to 5 years of age. It's like a school, and we have at the end an examination in which the child shows in practice that he can use every part of speech. Only then do we notice what a good teacher has been at work in him. But no one pauses to admire this marvelous work, and only when the child has begun going to school do we take an interest and pride in what he learns. She goes on to say, if we older people are sincere in our profession of love for the young, it is the miracle of their triumphs that should dazzle our eyes, and not their so-called defects. The child is a truly miraculous being, and this should be felt deeply by the educator. In 2 years' time, this mite has learned everything. At 1 year of age, the child says his first intentional word. He becomes ever more aware that language refers to his surroundings, and his wish to master it consciously becomes also greater. And just here, a great war springs up within him. Let me use my own experiences to illustrate what happens. I am a person with many ideas to express, and I want, as often happens in a foreign land, to convey them in a language not my own, so as to reach the heart of my audience. But in a foreign tongue, my words are a useless babbling. I know my audience to be intelligent, and my wish is to exchange views with them, but this privilege is denied me because I lack the means of expression. And she says, a person trying to express himself is badly in need of a teacher to enunciate the words for him very distinctly. Why cannot the home do this? Our usual habit instead is to do nothing. We imitate the child's babbling ourselves, and were it not that he has an inner teacher of his own, he would be unable to learn. It is this teacher who makes him listen to grown-ups talking to one another, even when they are not thinking about him. It urges him to master his language with the exactness which we make no effort to give him. And so what she's talking about here, and this might not apply to your home environment, but what she's saying here is that during her time, the child has a great need to listen to adults talk. That wasn't happening during her time. This sometimes is a struggle when we want to convey something to our coworkers or to a spouse or to somebody, some other adult, and we want to say something. We don't really always think about what we're saying to other people during that time, and we're not really always consciously thinking that the child is really listening to our conversations with other adults. And what she's saying here is that we need to be aware of that, and we need to also understand that the child is in great need to listen to intelligent conversation. And she says, returning to my illustration, how should I behave myself if babbling in a foreign tongue? If I wanted to say something especially important? She says, I might well lose my temper, get angry, and even shout. The same thing happens with the child of 2. And I think we're all pretty accustomed to that. And especially if you are in childcare and you have a toddler room and you have children who are biting, a lot of the time we tell parents, well, biting is usually what happens when the child doesn't have the language to express themselves, that this is an expression of something they want or don't want. And usually we tell parents, well, as soon as the child acquires more language, you'll see the biting disappear. This could also be true of hitting or screaming. And this is why we really have to focus on using that intelligent conversation. And the child needs to be around that so that the child starts to develop not only the mental organ, but the physical organs that go along with speech. She says at about 1.5 years, the child discovers another fact, and that is that each thing has its own name. And this is when the child really gets interested in labeling things and understanding nouns. Nouns become a really important part of the child's vocabulary. And she says, it is true that one cannot say everything with nouns, and at first he has to use the one word to express a whole thought. A marked feature of this condensed speech is that the words themselves become altered. The whole effect is what we call baby talk. And we all tend to do this at some point, some more than others. But also remember that before this, she said, the child creates speech organs based on what they are hearing. And so if we want the child's speech organs to develop correctly, we also need to use the correct speech. So she says language is not the only thing that the child is forming at this age. Among the others, there is also his sense of order. While he is passing through a phase of active construction of his psyche, the child often feels the deepest impulse to bring order into what, according to his logic, is in a state of confusion. So in this chapter, she's talked about 2 out of the 4 sensitive periods directly. And she said language is a sensitive period in the 0 to 6 age group, and order is a sensitive period in the 0 to 6 age group. And that just means that the child is especially sensitive to acquiring order in language during the 0 to 6 age group. The other 2 sensitive periods are the refinement of the senses and the refinement of movement. And all of this can also be applied to language, because refinement of the senses when it comes to speech is about hearing things, right? That auditory center is developing. And then refinement of movement, well, the speech organs have to move. So this is also a sensitiveness that the child has during that 0 to 6 age group. And with these sensitive periods, the important thing to keep in mind is these sensitive periods only happen at certain times during the 0 to 6 age group. And once they are gone, once that window of opportunity is closed, those sensitive periods don't come back again. They don't come back after the age of 6. And the last quote I'm going to include from chapter 11 by Maria Montessori is, I believe that mothers and society in general, far from keeping babies in isolation, should let them live in contact with grown-ups and frequently hear the best speech clearly pronounced. So if this is true, if everything that Maria Montessori said in this chapter is true, there's something that's been happening the last 2 to 3 years, 2.5 years, that has been interfering with the development of language in children. One of those things is we've been in isolation. Children have not been in contact with grown-ups. They've been at home. They've been isolating. And I don't mean stay-at-home parents. I'm not talking about homeschool. I'm talking about the child has not had experience in communities. They haven't had experience being out in society because of lockdowns and because of being forced into isolation. And so that has affected the child's development when it comes to language. Now, let's talk about the second part real quick. She says that children should be able to frequently hear the best speech clearly pronounced. Now, what else have we been doing over the last couple years? We've been masking people. So not only has the child been isolated from grown-ups, they've been isolated from community, they've been isolated from conversations, they've been isolated from being out in society, but they have also been deprived from hearing the best speech clearly pronounced, because masks interfere with speech development. Masks interfere with auditory development. The child isn't hearing correctly. The child isn't hearing clearly. The child can't see the lips. The child can't see the face. Therefore, they can't focus on developing the speech organs to reproduce sound. And so I want us to think about, when we're talking about language development, what we have been doing the last couple of years has been absolutely detrimental to language development. And if we want children to be proficient with language, we need to open up society, and we need to take off those masks and allow the child to hear language, be in contact with language, see how language is produced with the speech organs, and also be able to hear it clearly. So those are really important things that I think everyone needs to think about when it comes to what is in the best interest of the infant. Not just in regards to language development, but in regards to development as a whole. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, give it a thumbs up. Also, comment below, share this video with others, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.